So I finally got my hands on a Royal Enfield Himalayan, something that the audience has been asking me for a while. Finally, I've had a chance to get to know it a little bit. 250 miles later though, I'm done. This thing is going on sale. Stay tuned to find out what I think of the bike and why I've decided to get rid of this thing. Zdravo i dobrodošli, bon dia, bem-vindos, servus, willkommen, buenos dias, bienvenidos, greetings riders, and welcome to another Pegasus Motorcycle Tours and Consulting review. For you today I have my brand spanking new 2021 Royal Enfield Himalayan. Much talked about motorcycle in the small bore adventure touring industry. You know, this channel is about the best adventure touring motorcycles on the market, and this is one of the first ones I actually bought brand new, and I'm gonna be getting rid of it this week. Yeah, I just do not like this bike. I don't understand why all the positive ravings about this thing. I've only put 250 miles, so I'm actually departing from what I built this channel on, the fact that I review motorcycles only after getting to know them for a long time. I'm departing from that first part of the concept in that I haven't ridden it for very long. It's got 250 miles on the clock. Himalayan, right? It has this glorious name, the highest peak in the world, you know, and if you've seen some of the work of my business partner, Pong, who's a professional photographer, he visited the Himalayas twice in the past year, and just to put his camera on a little rail and have it take beautiful pictures of the clouds passing over Everest is just, that's the way you should experience it. So with the name like that, and with also the promo video, they show this bike climbing the Himalayas and wow, this incredible scenery. That was my goal today. I'm far from the Himalayas, but I am in the Santa Ana Mountains, and the highest peak here is called Santiago Peak. It's well less than 6,000 feet, nothing too exciting, but you get the beautiful view of the ocean and of West San Diego and Riverside County, so it's kind of nice that you get to see these beautiful views. It's the highest you can come here, but although it's another 30-40 minutes that way, I'm done for the day. I'm ready to head back home. My ass is just taking a pounding, and you know me, I'm promiscuous. I'll throw my leg around anything almost, but damn, I'm just in pain, and that's actually one of the things that need to be corrected right away. The company's marketing strategy was to basically show this bike climbing the Himalayas, and it just doesn't cut it. This bike is not ready for the American marketplace, for North America, for Australia, for Europe, places that you can really ride a motorcycle hard, and you need a motorcycle that can keep up with the pace of traffic, and a motorcycle that can be used really far from services and from help, like in the northern east territory of Australia, for example, and much of the southwest of the United States, a lot of the United States, much of Canada. You need a bike that can really go the distance, be reliable, and do it well. This bike doesn't do any of it well. And I'm actually quite surprised at how much my review and my experience will depart from some of the folks in this community that I've been watching for a while that I really respect. For example, Everride, Round the World Paul, all of them. Actually, his article has been featured on the website. If you go to the Himalayan website, you'll find his conclusion about the bike, and more or less even Cycle World, MC Garage, Motorcyclist, Commute, MC Commute, etc. All these positive reviews that rave about how this is a good all-around motorcycle that will get you from point A to point B. You'll love it, and it doesn't do anything particularly well, but it's worth a shot. This bike is not sufficient for the North American, Australian, European market, period. That's the conclusion, and I'll show you everything that I really dislike about the bike and why I have come to that conclusion. But there are some good things about this motorcycle. There's a very specific niche of the market that maybe is considering this motorcycle and maybe would enjoy it. But here's everything you need to know. An honest, truthful review about what is good and what is bad about this particular motorcycle. Let's begin. First of all, Royal Enfield Himalayan 2021 model. That's the model with the switchable ABS. A lot of interesting, innovative ideas aside from the very cool design. It's one of the best looking motorcycles on the road for that kind of money. You can have it for $5 grand MSRP, costs around $7,200-$7,300 to take it out of the dealership after all the California taxes, etc. So it's fairly accessible to low budget adventure tours, especially new riders who are looking to get into something new with the basic amenities such as switchable ABS. You don't have to be pulling the plug like in the previous models. I do like the looks of the bike, and it seems to be a more than not popular conclusion that it is a good looking bike. All intents and purposes, we have to give a shout out to Royal Enfield for attempting to make something that's physically appealing as well, because as I'm going to argue, its specifications, even when you just look at the paper, are not up to par. But the looks are pretty nice, and non-bikers will typically agree. I think they did a good job. The paint options are impressive, and the paint is pretty decent. I did tend to scuff it up here, just that one-time use off-road. My padded tank bag just seemed to scuff that up a little. That's a little disappointing because that's what it's for. The tank pad is there to protect the tank, but the matte gray smoke paint just did not take it too well, and I have scuff marks here and here. So the looks of the bike are decent. It's got some neat designs. You have engine guards here that are kind of unique for this segment. Most motorcycles off the lot do not come with any kind of protection, although the way they're bent doesn't give me a lot of confidence in the strong fall, but they're there. You don't get that with other riders. And not only are they there, but behind this Royal Enfield badge there are bolt holes so that you can actually bolt equipment to it, jerry cans and ammo boxes, whatever you want to think looks right and serves a purpose. It's nice that you get this little luggage rack in the back, although it's kind of small, but it does the job. I don't like that it's so high up. There's no reason for it to sit so high up. They could have made that a little more flush so that you could actually use it with a seat, but it's there. That's kind of nice. What else? I do like the fact that you get this adventure touring oriented foot peg, and the foot peg is convertible, so you can easily, with the 10mm screw, just remove this rubber part. So that's kind of nice. You can have more grippy foot pegs when you need them in a fairly easy and quick conversion. The motorcycle comes with a center stand. That's always nice to have, so you can maintain the chain very well. And from 2021, the motorcycles came with the switchable ABS, 2-channel ABS, so you can switch off the rear only. The front always remains. Pretty useless in my opinion. I'll tell you why, but it's kind of nice that you can do that on the fly. Put it in neutral, press the button, and you turn off the ABS in the rear. That's kind of nice because this motorcycle is being advertised as an adventure touring motorcycle. This is Royal Enfield's first adventure, let's say, into the ADV market, even though, of course, they sold motorcycles for the Indian military. That's how they came to be known, basically, in that market. Fun fact you didn't know, even it says on the key 1901, that's when they were established, but apparently they're the longest continuously running motorcycle company in the world, which is kind of interesting. Of course, 1901, the year of the famous Indian motorcycle company as well. One of my favorites, most beautiful motorcycles, pretty similar color, Indian Scout, I reviewed on this channel, an amazing machine. So 1901, you have the establishment of the company, and fun fact number 2, apparently they sold more motorcycles last year, or at least in 2000, let's say 15 to be safe, than Harley Davidson around the world. So that's kind of interesting, pretty impressive, right? So this motorcycle is not sufficient for the American market, for the North American, for Canada, for Australia, for Europe, but it seems plenty efficient in India, Southeast Asia, a lot of Latin America, where these bikes are actually considered higher end. In the US, of course, with the $5,000 MSRP price for the 2021 model with the ABS that's switchable, you actually don't walk out the door until you dish out $7,000, $7,500. I think that's also what you would pay in Australia for a bike like this. So by all means, this is not a cheap motorcycle, although it does feel cheap. That's the problem. So the engine was created completely anew from Royal Enfield. It's called the LS410 long stroke because it's longer than the bore. It is an air-cooled engine, and it does have an oil cooler as well on the left side of the front of the motorcycle. 411cc engine, tiny for North American markets, for North American highways, completely inadequate and underpowered. 24 foot-pounds of torque and similar horsepower, just incredibly underpowered motor, let's put it that way. It looks good. It's this massive single cylinder, just not powered enough to get you where you need to go, to pass vehicles, to get out of sticky situations. Why do I think this motorcycle is not sufficient for the North American, Australian, and European market? Because we have faster, arguably better roads here, so you have to keep up with traffic, you have to pull into the highway, you have to be able to overtake and pass vehicles when you're traveling 70 miles an hour. This can barely do any of that. I'm amazed. 411cc engine. This is Royal Enfield's first single overhead cam engine. It's just so underpowered. You ride a stretch and then you're like, damn, I wish I had a more fun bike. It's like one of those stories that you hear, that you read about individuals riding around the world in 60 days. You know, you're like, why would you do that? Why would you fly through everything? You know, take your time and enjoy it. But you also want something that feels like a motorcycle. That was my biggest, not regret, no regrets, but that was my biggest problem on the KLR. I toured so much internationally. At some point, I wish I just had a better bike, a little more powerful, more exciting motorcycle, like an Africa Twin or something. But this makes you desire that every step of the way. There's no places where you're like, that was kind of nice. No, it's like, I wish I could have a little more performance, you know, out of a motorcycle. So you just get the open air feel. I'm being brutally honest here. This bike is woefully underpowered for the North American market. Royal Enfield realizes that, and so just last week in 2023, I think the 650 is going to be released. It's going to look very much like this, except with the 19-inch front wheel, which is going to make it even less capable off-road, because this bike is not very capable off-road, not at all. It just doesn't cut it. You get 24.5 foot-pounds of torque, 24 horsepower, just absolutely miserable numbers. And that power is non-existent almost anywhere. I mean, you're getting on this thing full throttle. Once you enter the freeway, you can barely reach the speed of the flow of traffic. It's amazing. It's almost like this bike is not even, dare I say, safe to be on the road. My biggest argument against all the positive videos that I've seen so far on YouTube that review this motorcycle in overtly a positive manner is that it's a great beginner bike. This is a terrible beginner bike. This is a terrible beginner bike because there's no power to get you out of sticky situations, to pass vehicles. There's terrible braking, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and it just doesn't do anything well in that regard. It's not good for off-roading. You do get the looks of the 21-inch tire in the front and a 17 in the rear. You do have, what, 7.9 inches of travel up front and a little bit in the rear, and you get around, I believe, 8 inches of ground clearance. I found it to be totally inadequate because this bike is not a light motorcycle. This is a 439-pound motorcycle. 440 pounds on a 411cc engine that really has next to no power and very little braking power. It's not a good bike, let's be honest. And I applaud Royal Enfield for the attempt to make something that's comparable. Well, it's more comparable to the 250s and 300s than it is to anything in its class 400 and above. But this is just not a sufficient motorcycle in any department for, again, North American, European, and Australian markets. Okay, so you do get the single cylinder power plant, completely inefficient. Not inefficient, it's actually quite efficient. It gets somewhere around anywhere between 55 and 65 miles a gallon in this 4-gallon tank. So it is an efficient motor, but it's not sufficient for what we needed to do in the adventure touring industry. So, for example, MC Commute did a review of this motorcycle. They took it out in northern San Diego County in the hills, and I did the same. And there's one particular hill. I did that on purpose because on my way to Santiago Peak, I could go to an OHV park, off-roading vehicle park, and I was gonna play around a little bit, but by the time I got there, I already put 100 miles on a bike and just hated every aspect of it, that I did not feel at all interested in taking this bike on any kind of serious off-roading that you could practice there. So on the way there, you pass through the same area that MC Commute reviewer did, and there's a hill, 26% grade, or 26 degree, depending how you view it. In Europe, they look at those things differently. Very steep asphalt grade road. This thing could barely make it up that thing. So we are at one of the steepest climbs that I could find locally in San Diego County. 26% grade, which is actually exceeds 26%. So we have caution signs here, long steep grade ahead, 26% on that sign over there. Let's see how the Himalayan performs on this type of road. I'm not too confident, to be honest. Pretty damn terrible, I gotta say. I mean, it barely was able to climb this hill. I couldn't make it to 5th before the climb began, so I was immediately had to shift down to 3rd. That was for a few seconds only. So I was between 2nd gear most of the time. 2nd gear is where it started to finally get some speed, but I shifted to 3rd again close to the end of this hill, and it was still falling, so I had to shift back down to 2nd. So not very inspiring at all, not very inspiring at all. And I feel like I'm really, you know, the engine is really working to get there, so not very good at all. It just doesn't have power to pull through. Imagine having luggage on this thing, or a counter wind, or never mind a passenger. Or imagine you are in higher altitude. Actually, there is a reviewer who from India. Truth be told, he reviewed the carbureted version of this motorcycle, who reviews this motorcycle, and he also describes how he had a ton of issues trying to climb in Kashmir, I think he was, and I could totally see that, right? So the Himalayan, Mount Everest, 29,000 feet. That's, let's say 30,000 feet is where jet airplanes fly normally, between 30 and 40. So it's very high, right? The altitude is just absurd. The amount of oxygen, the lack of oxygen, just affects motorcycles, car engine, etc. Never mind that. Obviously, you're not climbing Mount Everest, but moral of the story: 30,000 feet is about 9,000. What is that? 9,000 meters, right? So that's 5 miles of height, right? So cut that in half, or cut that by 75%. This bike is going to be not getting enough oxygen to get you up that mountain. I'm convinced, because I was just trying to climb 6,000 feet and did not enjoy any of it. I actually had to back away before I could get anywhere close to the mountain. But it did give me some experience off-road, and I gotta say, I bottomed out way too many times. No feedback from the suspension. It has a limited suspension travel, 200 millimeters in the front, 180 in the rear, and very, very low ground clearance. I've been snagging the ground on asphalt in corners, not losing my grip, but almost, you know, just, and jumping in air for no apparent reason, stuff that I didn't even see in time. It's just, the suspension is so bad on this bike, and there's nothing you can do. You can adjust the rear, but it's kind of a pain because it's the type of tools that you need to whip out. It's underneath the seat. I got to take everything out. To get underneath the seat, you actually have to remove the passenger pillion, which is annoying because then I have to remove all the luggage. So it's like, come on, I'm just gonna suffer through it. So woefully inadequate suspension and horrendous brakes, like dangerous brakes that should not be on the market, to be honest. You get 300 millimeters, I think 240 in the rear, so fairly small disc brakes, and you're just squeezing the life out of this sucker, and you cannot stop it. I mean, you're just like, what is going on? There's another video that I'm going to link in the review here that overall has most of these reviews are positive in general. Mine is not, by the way, if you haven't caught that already. MC did a test, MC Commute review did a test of 60 to 0, 60 miles an hour, roughly, what, 100 kilometers an hour to 0 stopping distance, what normally takes, according to them, around 135 or so feet. It took this motorcycle 175 feet. So absolutely dismal. 50 feet when you're going 35 miles to 0. I mean, that's absurd. It's just too long of a distance to stop. Another reason why this motorcycle is not a good beginner motorcycle. You have no feel from the front brake. It doesn't tell you anything, how much more power you have left in the brakes, what the brake is doing. There is just a wooden feel of the lever, which came actually, well, my clutch leveler came, I had to adjust it twice because I think the cable stretch was so frequent that in these 250 miles I had to do it twice. But the brake lever itself just gives you no feedback whatsoever. Of course, the levers aren't even adjustable, so you can't even, if you have bigger or smaller hands, or if you need to adjust the cable on the clutch, you can't do it up here. You have to do it at the clutch level. It's fine, but it's just another indication why this bike is definitely on the cheaper side of things. I'm sure they're going to do a little better when they're broken in a little more, but for now they're just abysmal. I mean, they're just awful. You have to give yourself a ton of space and time to do it and to brake the vehicle, never mind if it's an emergency or something. It's so weak you can't even activate the front ABS, and I've tried. I mean, I'm squeezing these brakes with the vein in my neck popping, nothing. I just cannot stop this motorcycle. It's terrible. The rear, of course, activates the ABS pretty quickly, maybe a little too quickly for my preference, but again, it's just not sufficient in that regard. So 300 millimeters in the front, I believe 240 in the rear for the rotor itself, and of course 2 piston caliper in the front, 2 in the rear. 2 channel brakes, so only the rear is going to be deactivated, although the button itself is also a little bit on the cheaper end because you can't feel that you're doing anything. You have to hold it for quite a bit of time, but you don't even feel that you're holding, especially not with gloves. It doesn't click or anything. It doesn't. You're just touching it basically. That's at least the way that my buttons on this motorcycle feel. So, not a huge fan, but it's nice to have that option for sure. The seat, awful, just absolutely awful. I couldn't wait to get home. You know. Standing up on the foot pegs, like I said, that are easily convertible, pretty nice. So I had to do that just because of pain. Just awful, awful. And I actually had a gel pad and a woolen piece of sheepskin, you know, and I just could not manage it. I couldn't handle it. It's just too painful. So the seat itself, not very good. And again, it's very annoying that you have to remove the passenger in order to access the toolkit and the battery, etc. So there's a really convenient little storage for your documents and your owner manual, which was another sign that this bike really is on the very cheap end. I mean, the manual is printed crooked. There's a ton of typos, and it actually broke apart. I mean, the pages were just falling out the second time I opened it. Super annoying, because that's the first thing I have in my hand. That's my first impression of the motorcycle. If I don't test ride it, if I just buy it, and I'm reading through the manual because it's completely unfamiliar to me, and it's just falling apart. It's terrible. Why did I buy the bike then for that money? So I bought the bike for my daughter's first birthday. I thought it'd be biker mindset, a great first birthday gift, because we can have a beautiful bike in the living room for the 15 years that it takes for my daughter, who just turned 1, to get her license, and then we can enjoy the bike in the meantime, imagine all the adventures, and then finally she gets her license and we go on these amazing trips. That was my imagination. Of course, the wife says, absolutely not, you're crazy, you got to sell it. So instead of it sitting in my living room for 15 years, it's going to go to somebody else. But I definitely am not keeping it. I thought it was a good first bike too, because of all the reviews that would argue it is a good first bike, and you get the ABS that's switchable. It looks decent, so you're thinking maybe there's some value in that as well. It's, you know, it doesn't hurt to look at it. But and of course, the 2021 models in the US, in any case, all models have been EFI, although you get the choke. So I don't understand. The whole point is to avoid the downsides of the carb and having to choke the thing. So you do get a choke that doesn't even stay in its position, that you have to hold when you're turning the bike on colder mornings, which is super annoying. So the switch just does not want to stay in place. So you have to hold it for a minute or 30 seconds or whatever. It's just annoying, you know, just very annoying. So you do get the EFI motor with this thing, but again, not very confidence inspiring, that to be sure. So, okay, so we talked about the engine, the transmission, 5-speed, again, inadequate for American highways. 5-speed transmission that's also geared such a way that you have next to no power off the line. So I find myself having to move aside for vehicles because I don't feel like I belong on the road that's 55 miles an hour and up. I mean, I've been passing Toyota Yaris's and Sienna vans with kids inside, and I just can't keep up with this thing. Never mind passing power, there's none of that. But there's just no power off the line. It's geared kind of high for what it's intended to do, and that was my misunderstanding. I don't understand why people who know motorcycles, who've been reviewing it, who built a big career on YouTube reviewing motorcycles, and they argue that this is a satisfactory motorcycle in that regard, and it absolutely is not. You're going to be very disappointed by the lack of power on this motorcycle, no matter who you are, especially if you're a new rider, a beginner rider, a returning rider. This is not enough power to get you out of sticky situations. It's not enough power to get you in trouble if you have that problem of self-control. But then again, if it was twice the size it would still be not that much power, to be honest. It's just so underpowered. How underpowered? Well, MC Commute did a test on their motorcycle, which I wasn't going to do because this motorcycle hasn't been broken in yet. It's got 250 miles. It's another thing we're going to talk about. And they did a stopping distance and a quarter mile. Quarter mile took them somewhere around 17.7 seconds. That's abysmal. That's, I mean, we were mentioning Toyota Sienna van. It can do it in 14 or something. It's just abysmally slow, and you don't even reach 80 miles an hour by the time you hit that quarter mile. So it's just absurd. Very, very slow motorcycle. Insufficient for the North American, Australian, and European marketplace. Fine for the rest of the world that is totally okay with slower riding motorcycles that are actually good to have a little bit of extra suspension travel for poorer roads, let's say. Okay, so transmission, a little bit clunky. There's a few, you know, neutrals where they shouldn't be every now and then. Not a big deal. You find yourself kind of wiggling it in the red light to try to put it in gear, but I can deal with that. And again, it's very new, so maybe it just needs to be worked through a little longer. You do get a skid plate. That's another benefit. I like that they include the skid plate, and it's actually an aluminum skid plate, so it's not plastic like the Klar that breaks the first time it contacts the ground. So I do appreciate that. The tires that came on this motorcycle are an off-brand CEAT. Seat, I believe it's pronounced. This is, I believe, an Indian brand, so they're not very common in the United States at all. You can't buy these tires on other motorcycles, and they did not get very good reviews, although in my 250 miles of owning this motorcycle, I can't really talk too negatively about the tires. They perform fine. I actually do like the tread pattern. It seems to work fine on dirt where I've taken it, so can't speak too much about that, though. I just don't have enough experience with them. The new Royal Enfields, the 2022s, they come with Pirelli's MT60 tires, which are definitely of a better reputation, or at least a longer standing reputation stateside. You do get two, what are these, mud guards basically, but I've noticed that dirt is still being kicked up, and I only noticed that because at night you can see the dirt being kicked up more easily than during the day. I believe footage from my trip will show that as well, where the dirt's getting kicked up. So if anything, this one, bottom one, should have been extended more, I don't know, or just the top one should have been extended and the bottom one removed, if anything. But then of course it's hitting this air-cooled engine and the oil cooler, so I don't know, it looks a little funky in my opinion, but to each their own. We're not going to talk about too much about the aesthetics, of course, because they're all subjective, but I do like that they include a fork stabilizer for this motorcycle stock, so that's kind of neat. The light itself, speaking of night riding, is actually okay. It's decent for being stock. It does the job, and I do like that they include the passing light, which I think every motorcycle should have. Just the little passing light that actually turns both high and low beams on at the same time while you hold it immediately. You don't have to be switching up and down with your thumb. So I think that's a safety issue that every bike should have. Probably should be law just to include that in motorcycles nowadays, because it really is very useful. But the light itself is fine. The blinkers, kind of cheapish looking and dated, but you know, they do the job. You get the typical right, left, and they do include emergency flashers as well. That's kind of a nice option to have if you're lane splitting, if you're in a place where it's very busy, you want to be a little more visible. I always tend to use the flashers when I'm lane splitting. California, of course, being the only state in the union that allows for legal lane splitting, more common abroad. If you're interested in lane splitting, tactics or the benefits of I have a two-part review. One is on the benefits and the common misconceptions, and number two, part two, is on the proper techniques. I do it every day. This bike is actually pretty decent in that it's very narrow for that, without the luggage, of course, but you often don't get enough power, where I find myself trying to, you know, pass vehicles, and after the red turns green, a few seconds later, when most of the vehicles have actually reached cruising speed, I have to back up midway because I find myself powerless. I have no power to actually overtake the vehicle which I was attempting to overtake. And I find this weird situation, awkwardness, where I can see the person in the mirror saying, come on, come on, they're moving through. I can't, I'm trying, I just cannot do it. I'm bottoming out, you know, on the throttle and just topping out. Can't do it. Just woefully underpowered. So much for the wheels and the tires. The exhaust, actually decent sounding for what it is. It's a tiny little 411 engine, and it sounds okay. It's not loud or anything, which is kind of nice. I'm not a fan of loud exhaust, but it doesn't sound bad. It's not one of the negatives that I consider for the bike. It is actually exposed a little much here. I'm not a fan of that, and you can see kind of another factor that I really dislike is the wiring on this bike. Here's one example of it. The wires that go to the horn are touching the header and just melting. I mean, it's absurd. It's absurd. 250 miles, you know. The wiring on this bike is just awful. It's just awful. I mean, everything is exposed. Here you see the different colors of wires, and you even see the red, what is that? Like a red harness, and across also you see the harness completely exposed. Here you see wires that are doing a weird 90-degree twist, you know, or not 90, even more so. Just not very well, and they're just zip tied. here and here, and just basic zip ties that are holding that in place. The wiring, it seems very problematic. They're rubbing against things, so it's just a matter of time, especially if you're riding this bike mostly off-road, that those wires are going to short. 100%. My experience, and I speak about this in the review of the KLR 650, just because my green neutral wire was rubbing against the subframe of that motorcycle after, I don't know, 20-some thousand miles, it would actually short because of that. So, and it took me forever to find what's causing the problem. So that's a problem that this bike is going to have. I'm sure of it. Just because the wires are not well placed, let's say. The battery, I believe, is on the left. No, it's right here on the right side of this 4-bolt panel. So that's kind of nice. The motorcycle doesn't really vibrate too much. It's not something that I notice too much, although the handlebars feel very, very narrow, and they're 32 inches from point to point, not accommodating the curvature, but just from point to point, they're about 32 inches. And for comparison, KLR second gen, they're around 36. So you're sitting a little wider, you don't feel a little, cramped. I feel a little cramped on this bike, to be sure. There's not a lot of space for your luggage and stuff, and it is fairly low. Seat height is at close to 32, I believe, inches, somewhere around 800 millimeters in the seat height. So it is a smaller motorcycle, and I think that's what prompts people to say it's a good beginner bike. But again, I'm completely against this being a beginner bike. I fell for it, and after riding it, I realized it's not good for that. The mirrors, I don't generally mind the round mirrors because you can see a decent amount. But again, they were delivered or assembled. I guess that's the dealer's problem, not so much the producers. But it was assembled totally out of whack. So I have to loosen up the bolts here to twist well, not exactly the whole handlebar system, but at least the assembly that holds the brake and the clutch levers, so that I can actually see and make the mirrors usable. And if you've ever tried to replace a broken mirror on a car, for example, with one of those that you can cut out, one of those universal fix-it repair kits that you can cut out, and then you glue it to the thing and you realize this is total trash. That's what this feels like. It looks like it's an actual mirror, like it's a glass mirror, not plastic. But on the edges, it's completely warped. So you're looking at it and everything is warped. It doesn't feel like a flat mirror, and I really dislike that. I don't like that at all. Another thing that makes it feel cheap, So handlebars are fairly short. Some reviewers have talked about their experience with the handlebars being of poor quality. I can't speak to that. Of course, the earlier Indian models of the Himalayan had a bad reputation for the front end cracking entirely. And there's pictures of people just holding the handlebars and the bike is over there, The handlebars in the front wheel and the bike is over there because the welds are awful. They look awful. I bet you if I spent an hour on YouTube, I've never welded in my life. If I spent an hour on YouTube learning how to weld, I could do a better job. They're just awful. They're awful to look at, especially on this side that you like to approach. I mean, you could probably see it from there. It just looks like somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. And of course the subframe is welded, so if that cracks, forget it, like it's done. I don't know. That was an issue in the first iterations of this model that were released in India. It was addressed by Royal Enfield, but it still just looks pretty bad. I mean, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to have little pinholes and just this weird shapes for the welds, and that's everywhere. You can tell that this was just poorly welded. I don't know if it was poorly welded. I guess I can't speak because I haven't welded anything. It looks bad though. It looks like it shouldn't look like. Feel free to disagree, all you Royal Enfield owners, but that is not a good looking weld in my opinion. I don't know. I feel like I could do a better job if I put a little more effort into it. Something Royal Enfield should address because they do have that, unfortunately, that reputation, at least abroad, if not in the United States. You have the master cylinder here fairly exposed, very low to the ground. This one as well, fairly exposed. The reservoir, not a huge fan of that. This little rubber piece here, also cracking. That's supposed to protect the electricals. Again, the whole electrical wiring of this bike, not very good at all. The chain is easy to maintain, I gotta give it that. And I do like the fact that they've included these accessory, aka hard bag add-on carriers, let's say, options there. So you have options to bolt things to the bike. I've noticed that in several places. Here, there's a bolt hole on the other side here too, but it's blocked by the exhaust. But it seems like there is where you can put some more engine protection, or at least some highway pegs. And again, behind this sign here, there are four 10 millimeter, it looks like 10 millimeter nuts that are welded on there, so that you can actually bolt things to that from underneath somehow. You got to be creative, I guess. So that is kind of neat. I do gotta say that it's pretty neat to have options. You're always looking for ways you can mount things to the bike. The tank itself, again, 15 liters. That's around 4 gallons in the United States. At 5 liters, you get an F letter telling you that you're coming down on your fuel, and then the F will start counting how many miles from when you hit the reserve you actually traveled, which is kind of nice, because then you know exactly, or more or less you know where you're going to be when you're going to run out of gas, let's say. Another thing that I really noticed was a problem in California, especially for the fuel. When you're fueling up in California, we have a hood that gets pushed in. That hood prevents fumes from escaping, and it needs to be pushed in when you push the nozzle down into the tank for it to actually start allowing the fuel to flow. And in motorcycles, sometimes you have to help it do that. With this bike, because it has a very, very narrow or shallow entry here, you can't do it. The gun is all the way up here, so you have to do it with your hands, and it was really difficult to actually start that fuel in the few pumps that I've been to. So that's another thing to consider for the California market. This is actually stressful. If you have to do this fairly often, it would be very stressful, because I had a hell of a time trying to get that fuel to go. If you ever visit California, now you know why we're so particular. If your fuel doesn't start when you're there, make sure you're pushing, you're contracting that fume guard, or whatever they call it, so that the fuel can start to flow. The logo, honestly, the logo is a little juvenile. You're not going to be seeing too many of those tattooed on biceps, It's just a little childish in my opinion. But again, I shouldn't be talking like that, because it's an aesthetic thing. It's not a universally recognized truth. You might think it's badass, but I don't like looking at that at all. It just seems a little too curvy for my taste. What I don't like is when manufacturers slap stickers on and they're completely crooked. It just bothers me so much. Take a little bit of attention for that, because all these stickers are just slopped on there, completely crooked and out of line, and I hate looking at that. It makes me want to remove them and start over. Of course, you can't do that, because then if you ever try to register an out-of-state vehicle in California, they look for those stickers. So that's not something you want to mess with. I can't speak of the maintenance on this bike. I haven't owned it for very long to have to do anything to it other than to retighten or readjust the clutch cable twice in the 250 miles that I've owned it. But people say it's easy to work on. What I read is that oil changes are simple, but the maintenance schedule is a nightmare. It's twice as much as some of the more common bikes, the Japanese bikes that are in this class. They say twice as easy, but but I don't want to be doing it twice as much. The clearances, the oil changes, etc. Even the braking period is really annoying. Beware, if you're buying this bike new, you're not going to be able to ride it for more than 37 miles an hour for the first 300 some miles, so 500 kilometers. And for the next, until you reach 200 kilometers, or that would be around 1,250 miles, you can't go over 40, 47, something like 50, let's say 50 miles an hour, which is also, again, annoying. If you're buying this bike for a commuter, forget about it. Just forget about it. I don't have a place to ride this bike for 2,000 miles for under 40 miles an hour. I can't do that. I don't got the time. I want to enjoy the bike. I don't have to worry about that. Why don't they just do that out of the factory? Put it on a dyno or something. let the computer operate the throttle like it's supposed to be operated, because you're supposed to vary the throttle by at least 10%. You're not supposed to stay any place for very long, so you have to kind of vary the throttle. I just cannot ride like that, and I can't ride a very poorly responsive motorcycle that way in California. The windscreen is pretty decent. I think they call that a bikini screen or whatever. It's fairly small, but it does a good job. Again, you're not really going very fast on this thing anyways. So between that and the lack of vibration on the bike, it's not exhausting to ride, you know, to operate for longer periods of time, save for the very uncomfortable seat. I can't speak to the availability of original, never mind aftermarket parts, but you do have to take that into consideration if you're actually considering riding this bike to Alaska or Ushuaia or something crazy, in my opinion. You know, you have to consider that, because how easy is it going to be to find the cable harness that burns or malfunctions because dust is getting in there, or the foot peg that you break, the master cylinder that breaks because it's unprotected, you know? So just keep that in mind. I really think that for the money, almost any bike in this class and even below in the 300cc mark is going to be a better buy if that's what you're looking for, even if it's a used motorcycle, just because of that factor, if not for everything that I mentioned so far. Okay, let's talk about the dash. The dash is physically attractive. It's an analog tach and speedometer, so it's not too bad. You get a decent amount of information in the little digital display part of the speedometer at the bottom. You do get a fuel gauge, which is kind of nice, and you do get a compass, which is kind of nice. The bad part is that it's terribly off. Even the manual says that it could be off 45 degrees. Well, if the compass is off 45 degrees, that's a terrible compass, isn't it, right? So it does tell you how to calibrate it if the CA becomes displayed in its place. You're supposed to do figure eights for I don't know how long until it's done. But yeah, that's pretty useless, right? And I've noticed the same thing. I'm facing directly west because that's the ocean. I can prove it, and it's telling me that I'm not. That's unfortunate because it's there, but it's useless. The new versions also come with an optional GPS system. Have no experience with it. I'm not usually a fan because typically aftermarket GPS systems work better in, you know, off-road conditions. And Google Maps works better than any other system in the city because it also tells you the real-time traffic conditions, etc. So there's really no reason why GPS should be offered in motorcycles anymore. It's not especially when it's tiny. So off-roading on this thing, is it fun? Yeah, every motorcycle's fun. I'll like I say, I'm promiscuous with my bikes. I'll hop on anything. I'll throw my leg over anything. I'm not very picky, so to speak. That's the whole purpose of me building this channel. I'm just trying different motorcycles, seeing what I like, what I dislike. But if this is being sold as an adventure touring motorcycle, it fails in that regard because I wouldn't take this bike very far at all. For one, it's not good on the highway. It's not good for everyday commuting. You don't have the power. You don't have the braking power. For dirt riding, it can do it, but people have done it on Vespas around the world trips. You know what I mean? People can do it, but that's not the point. The point is, would you enjoy it? Can you do it well? I did most of my touring on a KLR 650. It's a capable bike. Fairly similar numbers, to be honest. Just a bigger tank, similar in weight, similar in suspension travel, etc. But that's one of the best sold motorcycles in the adventure touring industry in the world, for Kawasaki, of course. There was always a desire for me to go faster, to have a little more capable motorcycle. And I feel like with this bike, the first day you buy it, you feel that way, you know, in every situation, not just in adventure touring when you're bogged down and with luggage, etc. But just in everyday riding, this thing feels inadequate, you know. For the kind of money, that's inexcusable. So MSRP on this one is $5,000, takes around two and a half almost grand more to walk out of the dealership. Yeah, seven, let's say $7,200 to own this motorcycle out of the dealership. For $5,000, I'll buy you a bike that you'll be so much more happy with. And for $7,000, I'll buy you anything you want and I'll take you to dinner. We have steak on me. So that's a decent amount of money. That's money you can work with, you know? And again, I appreciate Royal Enfield's attempt and addition to the industry. It'll get more people riding. But what I'm trying to tell you is that if you're buying this bike, if you're considering this bike, be prepared to be a little bit disappointed in many respects. That's all I'm going to say. This bike is, again, woefully underpowered for the North American, Australian, European market. Maybe it's perfectly fine where it's being sold in Southeast Asia and Latin America, where roads are more challenging, they're slower, you know. But again, where are you going to take a bike that has very little aftermarket parts available? For example, aftermarket producers are not willing to risk, you know, their business on producing things for bikes that haven't been around for very much. So of course I'm referencing the competitor for this bike, another 400, the DRZ, which I've reviewed on this channel, a bike that's really amazing, excellent motorcycle for off-road, serious off-road riding. Yes, obviously limited on highways, but this bike is limited on highways and off-road riding. So where do you take it? Do you take it to the beach? Yeah, maybe you strap a surfboard and you can take it to the beach for the, you know, the aspect of it looking retro and that kind of thing, and being utilitarian in that way. It's efficient, you know, fuel efficient. Or if you have a ranch somewhere in Wyoming and you need to check your fences, this is the bike to own, right? You throw it around, fine. But for any kind of serious adventure touring, this isn't it, fellows, ladies and gentlemen. This is just not a sufficient motorcycle. So again, we applaud Royal Enfield for listening to our complaints and actually building a more powerful motorcycle. I would actually check it out. I'd be keen to check it out, but take my review not as prima facie criticism of what you're doing. We respect the fact that you're adding more interesting looking motorcycles with more interesting ideas to the market at, you know, I guess still at a lower price. But these things need to be addressed if this is gonna, you know, remain on the market for any longer period at all. Never mind if it's going to compete with, you know, the 310 BMW, the Versys by Kawasaki, DRZ, never. So just some things to consider. But yeah, that's about it. This is why this bike is gone, and I'm only selling it because my idea, as you loyal followers of this channel have maybe learned by now, that every bike that I buy, that I review, I sell, I want to actually offer the opportunity for my viewers to purchase first. So the week after the review of that particular motorcycle drops, my viewers have a chance to make a bid. So you are subscribed, you go to the Patreon linked in this description below, and through Patreon you send a message what your offer would be if you really want to own that motorcycle. There's no back and forth, we're not haggling or anything. I respect your offer, and if there is another viewer and subscriber who offers more, that person obviously deserves to have the bike then. I was going to do that with this one because this was a motorcycle intended for my daughter, as I said, for her first birthday. And I was going to have her pull a name from the hat as well. That'd be kind of cute. But in good conscience, I can't do that with this motorcycle. And I decided to sell it only because the buyer is a female rider who is very experienced with this motorcycle. Actually, she had the first one and she really liked it. And I'm very curious to hear her opinions about it. And she wanted to buy one for her wife. So after a long discussion, I pointed all these things out, and I'm selling it for a much lower price than what it was purchased for. So my conscience is clean because I know that this person knows the bike well. It's actually beneficial in that regard that two people can have the same motorcycle if they ever decided to take it on any kind of adventures, because then they can learn to work on one motorcycle, carry extra parts for one bike, carry the tools that fit one of those etc. So there's benefits there. Plus it looks kind of cool, let's be honest, it looks decent, but that's the only reason why I've decided not to offer it to you. So stay tuned for other motorcycle reviews. I hope that was informative, especially for those who are considering this bike. Thank you to all those who have reviewed it, who I've actually referenced. I appreciate your work as well, because I used it to buy this motorcycle, no regrets, right? Every motorcycle is a learning experience, and I appreciate Royal Enfield for creating something that's on the lower end of the price, and something that actually has a few interesting ideas that maybe pushes other producers to bring motorcycles to the market that come with luggage carriers and, you know, convertible foot pegs and this kind of cool look, let's be honest. But a lot of work still to be done on this bike. So, but you know, any motorcycle that allows you to have these kinds of experiences is worthwhile. Look at that beautiful sunset. Sun just setting behind the Santa Ana mountains underneath the Pacific. Look at that beautiful view. So there it is, folks. Royal Enfield Himalayan, the 411cc version. And we are still eagerly expecting the 650, which is going to look just as great. Maybe not just as great with the 19-inch front, but hopefully perform a lot better. Thank you for watching. Please participate in the conversation. And till next time, Nick, I'm out.